My gym crush asked me to spot her. I stood behind her. She smirked, "You can come closer." The first time I realized my gym crush knew I existed, I was lying on the floor of the locker room, staring at the ceiling and wondering why my heart was beating harder than it ever did during a workout. It wasn't because I'd lifted something heavy. It was because she had just walked over to me and asked the one question I'd secretly imagined hearing for months. "Can you spot me?" Her name was Alara. She was confident, focused, and somehow always seemed completely out of reach. I had spent weeks stealing quick glances at her between sets, pretending to adjust the weights whenever she walked past. But that morning, she stood directly in front of me with a small smile, waiting for my answer. I nodded, trying not to look nervous, and followed her toward the squat rack. My hands were already sweating. Then she stepped beneath the bar, looked at me through the mirror, and said with a playful smirk, "You can come closer." If you believe kindness can change someone's life, and that sometimes a second chance arrives when we least expect it, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. You never know whose heart might need a story like this today. I had always been the quiet guy at the gym. My name was Kieran, and unlike most people there, I wasn't training because I loved looking in the mirror or impressing anyone. I was trying to rebuild myself. 6 months earlier, I had lost my job, my confidence, and eventually my relationship. Everything seemed to disappear at once. My days became long and empty. I stopped answering friends' messages. I avoided family gatherings because I couldn't stand people asking what I was doing with my life. The gym was the only place where nobody asked questions. I could walk through those doors, put on my headphones, and spend an hour pretending I still had control over something. That was when I started noticing Alara. She always arrived around the same time, carrying a faded gray gym bag and a bottle of water covered in tiny stickers. She wasn't the loudest person in the room. She didn't need attention. She simply worked hard. Whenever she failed a repetition, she tried again. Whenever someone struggled with a weight, she quietly helped them. There was something about that kindness that stayed in my mind. I never imagined she would notice me. But she did. As I stood behind her at the squat rack, I kept a respectful distance, terrified of making her uncomfortable. She glanced at me through the mirror and smiled again. I moved slightly closer, keeping my hands ready without touching her. She completed the repetition safely, re-racked the weight, and laughed softly. I expected her to walk away, but instead she turned toward me and said something that caught me completely off guard. She told me I looked nervous. I tried to joke about it, but she saw right through me. She asked if I was okay. For a moment, I considered lying. I had become very good at saying I was fine. But something about the way she asked made lying feel impossible. I admitted that I had been having a difficult year. I told her I had lost my job and was struggling to find my direction again. I expected sympathy or an awkward change of subject. Instead, she simply said that losing something didn't mean I had lost myself. Those words hit harder than she probably realized. After that day, we began talking more often. At first, it was only about workouts. Then it became coffee after the gym. Then conversations about our families, our fears, our dreams, and the things we were too embarrassed to admit to anyone else. I discovered that Alara had her own scars. She had once trusted someone completely, only to be abandoned when life became difficult. She had spent years believing that needing someone made her weak. We understood each other because neither of us was as confident as we appeared. One evening, after a difficult workout, we sat outside the gym while the sun disappeared behind the buildings. Alara asked me why I kept treating my life like it was already over. I didn't know how to answer. I told her I was tired of failing. She looked at me and said something I would remember for the rest of my life: maybe failure isn't telling you to stop. Maybe it's asking you to become someone who can survive it. The next morning, I updated my resume. It sounds like a small thing, but for me it was enormous. I started applying again. I began waking up early. I stopped hiding from my friends. I started believing that my life could still become something different. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I received a phone call offering me an interview for a job I had wanted for years. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My hands were shaking. I immediately thought of Alara. I rushed to the gym because I wanted to tell her. But when I arrived, she wasn't there. I waited. 10 minutes became 30. Then I saw her gym bag sitting near the entrance, but she was nowhere around. I asked the receptionist and learned that Alara had received bad news that morning. Her mother had been taken to the hospital. Without thinking, I drove to the hospital. When I found her sitting alone in the hallway, her confident expression was gone. She looked exhausted, frightened, and small. I didn't try to give her some perfect speech. I simply sat beside her. She leaned against my shoulder. For the first time, I understood that being there for someone wasn't about having the right words. Sometimes it was just about refusing to leave. Her mother eventually came through the crisis, and Alara slowly began smiling again. Weeks later, I walked into the gym before sunrise. I was wearing a new shirt, carrying my old gym bag, and feeling strangely confident. Alara was already there. She looked at me through the mirror and smiled. She asked how my interview went. I told her I got the job. Her face lit up, and she hugged me before I could say anything else. In that moment, I realized something beautiful. I had walked into that gym thinking I needed to become stronger so that someone might notice me. But the person who noticed me first had never cared about how much weight I could lift. She cared about whether I was willing to stand back up. Months later, I still remembered that first day when she asked me to spot her. I remembered standing behind her, terrified of getting too close. I remembered her playful smile and those simple words, "You can come closer." But I finally understood that she hadn't only been talking about the distance between us. She had been unknowingly inviting me closer to life. Closer to courage. Closer to hope. And closer to the person I had almost given up on becoming. Sometimes love doesn't arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives as a smile across a gym mirror. Sometimes it sounds like a simple question asking if you're okay. Sometimes the person who changes your life never realizes how close you were to giving up before they came along. And sometimes, the greatest gift another human being can give you isn't money, success, or even love. It's the reminder that you are still worth fighting for. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may be struggling silently, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House for more emotional stories about hope, kindness, courage, and second chances. And before you leave, comment, "I will stand up again," if you've ever fallen in life but decided you weren't finished yet. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you for you to finally start believing in yourself. And maybe that's what we all need sometimes, not someone to carry us, but someone willing to stand beside us until we find the strength to stand on our own.